Good morning. If we haven't met, my name is Tim, and I am one of the pastors here, and glad that you're here with us. And I have something to share, a confession, if you will. I actually, until this week, haven't told anyone this. I've only told now a few people. Now I'm letting everyone know. But one of the questions that I find the most perplexing in my life that I get asked more often than you think, and by perplexing, it's kind of frustrating at times. Like for instance, last night we're hanging out with some neighbors and new friends, and they asked me this question. Where I'm sitting on the couch yesterday watching TV, watching football, and my youngest daughter asks me this question, and it's perplexing to me because I don't know how to answer it. And here's the question. Where are you from? Now, for you, you might be able to answer that question like without thinking about it. But for someone like me, growing up, I moved a lot. Like a lot. You see, by the time I was 22, I had moved from where I was born, Omaha, Nebraska, okay? We got a graph that I drew very nicely for you, all right? So I went from Omaha, Nebraska, then I moved to Fresno, California. And then from Fresno, California, I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. From Knoxville, Tennessee, I moved to Rancho Cucamonga, California. From Rancho Cucamonga, California, I moved to Austin, Texas. From Austin, Texas, I moved back to Pismo Beach, California. And then finally, I moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee. So when I say I moved a lot, it's not like I moved from one house to the next. Like I moved from one coast to the other. And as a result, I didn't know like my identity. Like geographically speaking, I don't know my identity. So when you ask me where I'm from, if you're from Tennessee, I want to say Tennessee, but that's not completely 100% the whole story. Some of you are Californians and you say, where are you from? I want to say California so that we have that camaraderie together, but that also wouldn't be 100% true. So what does one do who has no true identity where he's from? Kind of like a chameleon. I just become who you need me to be, right? So Tennessee, yeah, I can be from Tennessee. I can say go Vols with the rest of them. Actually, they are my favorite team, right? But California, yeah, I could talk California, Yosemite, beaches, surfing. I could talk all that with you. You need Texas State history? I got you covered. I took it, right? Like I have all of these things covered. And I tell you this, though, because moving around, especially through middle school, high school, college age years, as you can imagine, pretty formative time, it had a profound effect on my identity, probably more than the average person. Thankfully, God gave me great parents, and they helped me through some of these struggles and reminded me where my true identity lies. Perhaps for you, your identity isn't wrapped up in geography, okay? That's a Tim issue, okay? But is it something else? You know, in a world in which we live today, I don't think I have to make very much of a case that a lot of people are in an identity crisis. So many people find their identities wrapped up in what they do or who they know, what they've achieved, their social, political, or leisure affiliations. Perhaps they wrap their identity up in the school they attended, or perhaps their school their kids attend. Perhaps they wrap their identity around how their kids act or just their kids altogether. If we aren't careful, we can wrap our identity into any number of things that aren't ultimately meant to be where our identity is supposed to be wrapped up in. What I mean by that is we find our identity, if we find our identity anything other than Jesus, I think it can be a recipe for disaster, for disappointment, and ultimately chaos. See, understanding where our true identity lies is crucial because when we see who we are and why we're here and what we're called to do, we can be more effective at navigating some of life's hurdles and challenges and disappointments, the storms of life, the suffering of life. And that's why I love the series that we're in, You Are. Over the past few weeks, we've been looking at our identity of who we are. And if you haven't been here the past few weeks, what we just read, we've been camping out in 1 Peter chapter 2, 9 through 12. And if you have your Bibles there, I want to invite you to turn there because that's where we're, again, this week going to be. And as you're turning there, I just want to remind you that Peter is writing to churches who are scattered, who are marginalized, who are persecuted by their Roman and Greek neighbors. This book was written to predominantly Gentile Christians in Asia Minor region, okay, which is like modern-day Turkey. So Peter wrote this book so that it could be read at a church and then passed off to the next one all through that region. And so Peter writes this letter to encourage these Christians in the midst of their suffering. And I find it fascinating because how does he encourage them? By reminding them of who they are. So if you have your Bible, you can turn with me. We'll be in 1 Peter chapter 2, and here is what it says. It says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." We need to remember that the believers that Peter is writing to are suffering greatly in these days. And the purpose of this letter is to encourage them to steadfast, to hold, to hang in there by remembering that they are God's people on God's mission for God's glory. These people are in the midst of distress and pressure, and they're being reminded that you are God's people, that you are on God's mission. And you're doing this for God's glory. So this letter for us today, some 2,000 years later, can serve as an encouragement for every one of us that when we remember that we're God's people on God's mission for God's glory, that man, we can overcome a lot of obstacles, a lot of hurdles and challenges when life hits us. And much like the churches in Asia Minor, there's a lot going on in the world. There was a lot going on then, and there's a lot going on now. We see history kind of repeat itself, whether it's political unrest or economic frustrations or natural disasters or economic frustrations, loss, grief, social and moral changes. There was a lot going on, and there is a lot going on. But we, as Christ followers, can know how to act and live in this world. And that's so important because this stuff that I just listed off isn't going to go away, but God has placed us right here, right now, to know how to reflect his glory, to be Christ followers in the culture in which he's placed us. In the same way, Peter is reminding them the same thing. And if we're not careful, though, we can allow life circumstances, all these exterior factors, to affect not only how we view ourselves, but also we forget who God is. And it's in this text that Peter is reminding us that we are who we are. He's reminding us of who we are. See, in this series, we've looked at what it means to be a chosen race, the first thing. The second thing John last week talked about is a royal priesthood. And today we want to talk about what it means to be a holy nation. A holy nation. If you're anything like me, kind of like royal priesthood, like I hear holy nation and it kind of sounds churchy to me if I'm being completely honest. I've grown up in the church and more than sounding churchy, there's a lot of times where I frankly just didn't even know what it meant, right? The term holy nation might conjure up images of a nun or monks praying for 10 hours a day, or maybe you picture someone who never does or says anything wrong, and that's your mindset of holy. But if we're really being honest, we might think of ourselves as kind of the last person to be included in what is called a holy nation. Maybe I'm the only one who feels that way. When I hear a holy nation and then I think about who I am and who I've been and even the things that go on in my life and the struggles I struggle with, I'm like, hey, holy nation, I don't know about that. Am I the only one? Sometimes we feel like we're not worthy of that title. And I think it's because every single one of us kind of know our faults and our failings. And as a result, we kind of feel completely disconnected from this text. It's so easy to kind of just switch off and read this and say, okay, that's great. And then you move past it without really understanding it. But today I really want to unpack what it means to be a holy nation and how important that is a part of our identity of who we are. And my prayer is that as we get a better grasp of it, it will have a profound impact on our lives and how we live. So with that said, to understand what it means to be a holy nation, we have to rewind all the way back to the Old Testament. Just like we did with royal priesthood, this was a term that was used a lot in the Old Testament, holy nation. And we see it in Exodus played out. In Exodus chapter 19, this was drawn to my attention earlier this week, but it's pretty fascinating. In Exodus 19, God gives a promise before Exodus 20 where his law comes in. So the nation of Israel gets a promise before they get the law. In Exodus 19, and we read that Israel's is God's holy people. Listen what he says to the Israelites through Moses in Exodus 19, 5 through 6. It says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my commands, you shall be my treasured possessions among all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Doesn't that sound familiar? Something like we just read? Peter's just taking some old language and adopting it into his letter, and we'll see why he does that in a little bit. But this isn't the only time where we see God reminding his people. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6, it says, for you are a holy people to the Lord. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Deuteronomy 26:18 says, and the Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession, that he has promised you, that you are to keep all of his commandments, and that you shall and he will set you in praise and in fame and honor high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he has promised. These verses show us that we can see that God set the nation of Israel, apart as his holy people. He promised to be faithful to them, and he asks in return that they be faithful to him as well, that they consecrate themselves to the Lord. They serve the Lord alone. But that's not what we read in the Old Testament, right? Time and time again, we see Israel breaking their vows to God. They're unfaithful to God. They serve other gods. They pursue their own pleasures, their own desires. But God is always faithful to them. God never breaks their promise. He pursues his people with a relentless passion. In the book of Hosea, we read a powerful story of the prophet Hosea and how he was betrayed by his wife Gomer. I don't know if you're familiar with this story at all, but she's unfaithful to him. It's a scandalous story. She returns back to a lifestyle of prostitution. Now imagine you're a groom, and your bride goes back to an old lifestyle of prostitution. But although Hosea felt betrayed, he continued to love her. He continued to pursue her. And God uses that exact metaphor of a bride and a bridegroom to explain how he felt betrayed by Israel's infidelity. Like a bridegroom that was scorned by his bride, his heart ached, yet God was always willing to forgive and to welcome them back. Now, this metaphor of a bride and bridegroom we start seeing that language introduced for the nation of Israel and God's relationship in Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah says in chapter 61, verse 10, says, I will rejoice greatly in the Lord. My soul shall exalt in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself like a priest with beautiful headdress, as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. So we see in this verse that it's God who clothes his people with fresh garments of salvation and robes of righteousness. He calls his people his bride, and he is our bridegroom. Now, hang in there. If you don't love this language of bride, bridegroom, whether, it's weird, I get it. But don't stop listening, because I think there are benefits to us knowing what it means as the bride of Christ, what that means, because I think that shows how truly adored and loved by God we are. Because when we learn and really identify that our identity is actually in being chosen by God, by being beloved by God, being cherished by God like a groom who only has eyes for his bride, it changes the way we view God. It changes the way we interact with the world around us. September 3rd, September 25th, 2010, I'm proud of myself. I didn't have to ask my wife this date, but that was when I married my wife, Jill. I'm an emotional guy as it is, okay? But this day in particular, I didn't stand a chance, okay? So I walk into the sanctuary where we're gonna get married. It's before any of us have seen any other people. It's kind of the first look, right? And I walk in, I open the door, and there I see my wife, Jill, for the first time in her wedding dress. And she was gorgeous. And I lost it. I had tears. There's a picture. This is just us young bucks. Look at us. She's beautiful. I didn't want a picture of myself because I'm just like crying. But man, when I saw her, in that moment, I didn't care about the finances of how much a wedding costs. I knew that I was going to protect her, sacrifice for her, look after her. And I give you that analogy as an imperfect picture, very imperfect picture of, I think, how God feels about us. As John was explaining during communion, oftentimes we think that our unholiness and our behavior, our past mistakes, our failures, that they disqualify us from being included in what God calls a holy nation. We think that God could not possibly adore us after everything we've done, thought, said in our lives. But I just want to remind us today that the holiness that we have as Christ followers actually isn't even of ourselves. This is why we can all be included as a holy nation, that we have been clothed not in our own righteousness, but in the righteousness of Jesus. And honestly, that should free us up, that none of us can make ourselves holy. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can read. There's no law that you can live up to make yourself holy. We can't do it. But Jesus has done it for each and every one of us. We have been made holy by the blood of Jesus. In 2 Corinthians 5:21, it says, for our sake, he, God, made him, Jesus, to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. If you're a scripture memorizer or want to start, besides the 2 Peter passage, like this would be another one just to deposit in the bank, because this is an awesome verse to constantly remember. It's one of these promises that the blood of Jesus has washed us clean, and in the eyes of God that we are no longer stained, we are no longer blemished, we are made clean. According to Philippians 3:9, it says, we don't have a righteousness that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ. The righteousness that comes, or the righteousness from God that depends on faith. This is a beautiful reminder that we have been set free from the penalty of sin, that we are being set free from the power of sin in our lives, and we will one day be set free from the presence of sin. I don't know if you're anything like me, but these are words that I celebrate, but I also constantly need to be reminded of. Because left to my own devices, I can kind of get stuck in my guilt and my shame and my condemnation because of my sin. You know what I often do when I feel stuck? I keep acting in ways that reflect how I see myself. You know, some of you wonder why you continue to repeat patterns of destructive behavior. Why you get stuck. Why do I get stuck in seasons and cycles of pits of despair? Or why do I go back to the things that I have tried to turn away from? And oftentimes, I think we're acting out of the way we see ourselves. And so until we change the way we see ourselves, nothing changes. This isn't a self-help thing. This comes out of Romans 12, verse, I think it's 2. It says, don't conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind. I need to be reminded that I am the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus, that I'm not my past self, I'm not my past sin, I'm not what others say I am who God says I am. And that's why 1 Peter chapter 2 is so important, because who does God say we are? What we're talking about today, he says we are a holy nation. In the Old Testament, God made a covenant with Israel. But through Jesus, he formed a new covenant, and everyone who believes in Jesus and trusts in him are part of that new covenant, are made what's called a holy nation. John Piper says it this way about being a holy nation. He says, holy means God chose us, that we should be holy, set apart for him, no longer common, no longer unclean, his own special possession. We are a chosen people, a holy nation. That means not first that we become good, but we're becoming something. We are holy in that he took us out of the mob and he claimed us. He said, you're mine, you're chosen, you're my loved ones, my family, my bride. Through the atoning work of Jesus Christ on the cross, we are now presented to God as holy and blameless. It's not anything that we have done. It's because of what Jesus did. We are made holy. We are set apart. And we get to be faithful and loyal and committed to God above all others as the people of God, his church. We are a new nation. And what marks this new nation is not a language or an ethnicity. It's holiness. That it's our set apartness. We are God's bride, set apart to him and for him. Just one chapter earlier in 1 Peter chapter 1, it says, be holy because I am holy. This is a quote from the Old Testament where God is telling the nation of Israel to be holy. Now Peter is taking that and he's telling those who are in Christ to be holy. As followers of Christ, we are categorically and qualitatively different than the world. We are saved exclusively to God, and therefore we are set apart from the world in things like our ambition, our affection, in our actions. We're different because we live for God, not for ourselves. We do what God does. We love what God loves. We hate, according to Scripture, what God hates. Don't we? You see, when you and I are set apart from the world, we have the potential to reflect the character of God to the world around us. Holy is belonging to God and being different. We live differently because we belong to Jesus. And it's so easy, I think, to hear this message and to think just individualistically, like, I am holy, and that's true, so don't hear me wrong, but Peter's writing to a group of people, and John mentioned it, so I'm going to steal it. He said, y'all, right? Y'all are a holy nation. Y'all are set apart. And why is he reminding a group of people of this? Because I believe when a group of people live differently, all of a sudden verse 9 becomes more evident, where he says in chapter 2, y'all live different, or you're a holy nation, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. We're to live differently and set apart so that we can proclaim the excellencies of Jesus. Peter's writing this to encourage people, to remind them of who they are, of their identity, of them being God's people for God's mission, for God's glory. They're God's people. We're God's people. Our identity is to be set apart for God. We're on mission. We're to stand out for God, ultimately for his glory. We're to proclaim how we are a changed people. So what? What's this mean for you and me? You know, I started out this morning by saying that I can be a little bit of a chameleon when it comes to being where I'm from, that if you need me from California, I can be California. Tennessee, I got you covered. I can morph into whoever you need me to be, but you know what I'm doing when I do that? Just conforming. You know why I do that? And don't hear me, it's just an example. I don't think I'm sinning when I do this, but why I do that is because it's just easier, right? It's easier to conform versus giving you the long story or whatever it may be. But we as a holy nation are called to be set apart. We're to be different. But here's the challenge. If we're not careful, we can so easily slip back into the patterns of this world. We can drift back into looking like the world. We can jump into the current of the world and just see wherever it takes us. But shouldn't our lives as Christ's followers be different? Shouldn't us as a holy nation look different? Don't we want our lives to be different? Like at work. Does your life look different than the world, the people around you? Is it easy for you to jump in and gossip about your boss or coworkers because everyone's doing it? Are you always negative? Do you throw other people under the bus so that you maybe can get ahead? Are you always self-promoting, just talking about yourself? Do you maybe perhaps don't cheat or break the law, but you definitely look for the gray area to turn a profit? Or are you striving for holiness? Do you build people up? Do you encourage? When people hear you and see you, they notice and make comments like, man, there's something different about you. Not weird, but different. Are you living a set-apart life by how you interact with others? Perhaps you're counterculture to your work environment. Do you have a joy, a selflessness, a willingness to sacrifice and serve others? Do you live above reproach when no one else is looking? What about at home? Do you look different than the world? Is there bitterness that you let creep into your heart toward your spouse and then you just kind of let it fester and boil up? Do you watch things on TV and listen to things through podcasts or music and you think to yourself, well, it's not that bad, or it's nothing I haven't seen before? Is there an apathy or a lack of discipline when it comes to your walk with God or even discipling your own kids? Do you indulge in the same way that perhaps maybe your neighbors do? Do you speak the same way that your neighbors do? Do you post the same way on your Facebook neighborhood page that your neighbors do? Are you striving for holiness? Do you keep short accounts toward your spouse? Do you guard your heart and your mind about what you're allowing in? Are you intentional about your discipleship and your family's discipleship? Do you open up your house to your neighbors to show and to share that your life is different? Not weird, but different. Perhaps you're sitting there and you're like, Tim, you don't understand. At work, like I'm the only one who is a Christian, or in my neighborhood, I'm the only one that doesn't fill in the blank. I get that, but that's one of the reasons why we gather as a church together week in and week out as the bride of Christ, that we can come together to remind ourselves that we are called out of darkness and into marvelous light so that we can proclaim His excellencies to those around us. That's why we gather in life groups and do things like Engage the Heart, where it's an opportunity for us to kind of expose our sin, to get it out into the light so we don't have to live in darkness. So not so that we feel embarrassed about ourselves, but instead we can expose those things so that we can be reminded of the gospel, that we are forgiven, that we are made holy, that we aren't defined by our mistakes and our sin, but instead we are defined by God and His righteousness that He bestows on us. We are a holy nation, a different people, a set-apart people. Our prayer is that we don't lose sight of that we're not just random individuals trying to live good, moral lives. We are a holy nation called by God to Himself. And as a result, we get to live lives worthy of that calling, showing the world not just who we are, but whose we are. Because when we live out our true identity, we can navigate through life's difficulties, its hurdles, its storms with resilience and grace. We get to be the holy nation of God. And we get to let the world know that by being set apart, by being different. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for loving us, especially when we're a mess or far from perfect. Thank you for making us a part of what you call a holy nation, even if we don't feel holy ourselves. God, help us understand and believe that you've already made us righteous and holy through Jesus, and it's our faith in Jesus. Give us the courage to live like it's true at work, at home, with our friends, our families, our neighbors. God, keep reminding us that we're your people with a big mission to show the world how amazing you are, that you do love us. God, when we mess up, remind us that we're still yours, that we're still loved, we're still called to this mission. God, as a church, I pray that you help us continue to be a caring family that helps each other stay steadfast and strong. Help us to live in a way that makes people stop and ask, man, what is different about that group of people? God, we're yours. Pray, Lord, that we live like it, that we share your greatness with everyone we encounter. Lord, we thank you for this time.